21. Mr. Natale goes to Washington. In early 1982, Natale found himself in front of a federal parole board for a review of his sentence. The three-member group seemed perplexed. Why was he doing 27 years when the federal sentencing guidelines called for 52 to 80 months, just under 7 years?
They talked it over and they said, "We're going to recommend a reduction. We're not going to set you free, but you can't do 27 years,
recalled Natale.
Maybe I would have done 8, 9. I would have been home.
The elated Natale thanked them profusely, shook everyone's hand, and was told to expect word in a month. He called Lucia with the good news, and she came up to visit with the wives of fellow Mafia members Ronnie Turchi and George Flynn. They arrived in the visitors' area with 3 guards watching every move on the floor below. And then Mrs. Natale's visit was interrupted by one of the corrections officers. Her husband was needed in the warden's office when they were finished. The couple said goodbye, and Natale headed to see the warden, with no idea of the group assembled waiting for his presence.
6, 7, 8 suits are there,
he remembered.
From Washington. They told me about a Senate investigating committee. They told me, if your answers are correct, and we know you're not a liar, all that bullshit, we will recommend a reduction and you could be home in maybe 3 or 4 months.
The response, as it had in Florida, came instantly to Natale's lips.
I'm afraid you got the wrong guy. Can I go back to my cell?
The parole folks had already offered him what was now on the table from the feds. Natale was in the prison's red top, the red-tiled center area of Lewisburg, when his counselor summoned him for another meeting. He couldn't imagine what the problem was. An argument with another inmate? His mind began racing. With a sentence reduction awaiting, Natale was keenly aware of keeping his nose clean. An envelope was waiting from the Senate committee. The counselor said he had no idea what was inside. Natale, on the other hand, knew what was waiting.
They put the carrot in front of me with the parole, and then I go up there to the warden's office, he said ruefully. And when I don't speak, a week after that, I heard that I'd been denied by the parole board for my reduction. It's unheard of, but it happened.
So did the trip to testify before the Senate committee. On June 22, 1982, Mr. Natale went to Washington, arriving with a grant of immunity from the panel waiting to question him. It would become a life-defining moment, when all of the lessons learned across the decades from Skinny Razor and Angelo Bruno were put to the ultimate test. He was brought directly from solitary confinement at Lewisburg to the Dirksen Senate office building in Washington. Lucia took the Amtrak train south from Jersey with their daughters Rebecca and Carmen for their first opportunity to see Ralph outside a federal prison in 3 years. The trio jumped in a cab for the last leg of their journey. The public hearing on organized crime was a big deal, with the Senate committee looking to hang some prize heads on the office wall before a media horde. Their targets? Chicago boss Anthony Accardo, Natale's old Philadelphia nemesis Nicky Scarfo, and longtime Union pal Ed Hanley. The panel wanted Natale's long-held secrets about Atlantic City, and the deal hatched in Ferraro's over coffee and dessert. Ralph knew his words held the keys to any hopes of imminent freedom. He also knew they would be chosen carefully and reveal little, no matter the cost to himself, or his wife or his kids. He felt a tinge of pride, too, since the federal invitation certified that Senate investigators were aware of his pivotal role in the nexus of organized crime and organized labor.
You gotta remember, I'm jammed up, he says now. Imagine that. That Atlantic City money is there. I put that together with Angelo, Carlo Gambino, and Tony Accardo, and not a dime of it was going to my family.
A look of pure disgust covers his face as he spits out 2 names.
Nicky Scarfo, Phil Testa.
The captain assigned to guard the summoned witness showed some sympathy for Natale's plight, directing him to a bathroom with a shower inside the office.
I don't need a shower, Natale told his benefactor. I just want to wash my face and shave.
Once Natale had cleaned up, the captain allowed Lucia inside as the 2 girls, outside in the hallway, peered through a crack in the office door at their dad. Once they left, Natale donned his attire for the hearing. Dark sports coat, plain dark tie, white shirt and slacks, with hair cropped short. He was freshly shaved and sported an unlikely tan from his time in the yard. He was accompanied by an attorney, Glenn Zeitz. Rebecca watched from the hallway, looking at her dad through a door left ajar. Natale looked more like the head of a Fortune 500 company than a mafia cohort jailed for arson and drug dealing, as Senator William Roth of Delaware commenced with the questioning. Natale's reply, never in doubt as he waited to take his seat before the panel, was delivered implacably.
"Senator, on the advice of my counsel, I can't answer," he said evenly.
Another question.
"I will not answer it this time."
Senator Warren Rudman exploded angrily when Natale declined to answer a question about providing guns for Angelo Bruno, and Zeitz intervened. "You're not here to make speeches to this committee," Rudman snapped. "You're here to advise your client. You talk to Mr. Natale. I'd like him to answer it. He's been instructed to answer it." Natale's reply was succinct.
"I refuse to answer, Senator."
"Do you understand that you have been instructed to answer this question?" shot back Roth.
"Yes, I do, Senator."
Natale had his hands crossed on the table in front of him. Roth raised the ante. "Do you understand that in view of your refusal to testify, in response to this subcommittee's grant of immunity, that I believe the record would support a finding of either civil or criminal contempt on your part? Such a finding could subject you to additional incarceration. I must advise you that such action on your part will not be taken lightly." The Ralphie of South Philadelphia was suddenly present at the table with his attorney as a bristling Natale responded,
"I don't take it lightly either, Senator. I think this panel has went beyond the scope of this investigation to answer Senator Rudman. You've heard Charlie Allen. He is a complete liar. He tells 20% truth and 80% lies. I've got 27 years already. They're trying to give me more time on the same case. I didn't come in here looking for any extra time, but on something like that, I think it is a trap for me. I wanted to answer the best I could. Right now, I can't. Beyond that there."
Roth pressed on. "Didn't he meet with Bruno regularly, usually for lunch?"
"Yes, I did. He's my friend," Natale replied, referring to his slain boss in the present tense. "He's my friend. Maybe twice a week."
"Did Mr. Bruno give you orders on union matters during these luncheons?" Roth continued.
"Never. Never. I'll take a polygraph for that. See if Charlie Allen will take the same polygraph with me on these questions. Senator, none whatsoever."
"Was Angelo Bruno a crime figure?"
"He was a fond, adorable man," Natale said evenly. "No, I never heard of those things."
The questions shifted to Ed Hanley. "Did they ever meet?"
"Many times," said Natale. "He was my boss. He signed my paychecks."
"And loans made from union pension funds?"
"I'll take a polygraph on all of that also,"
Natale said combatively. He was then asked about one of the witnesses to follow, the current boss of the Philadelphia mob, Little Nicky Scarfo. Natale despised Scarfo with every bone in his body. Butter would melt in his mouth as he answered the questions, but the bitter taste of his responses would never disappear.
"I think Nicky was a bartender at one time," said Natale. "A few years ago in Atlantic City he was tending bar, I think at the 500 Club. I've known Nicky casually during the last 10, 12 years. That's what I know of him. Nicky's a fine little guy."
"And was Scarfo mobbed up?"
"No, we were all born and raised there. We don't talk that way about each other."
The grand finale followed, with Rudman and Natale going toe-to-toe like a pair of fighters battling for the championship belt. "I just want to nail this down, Mr. Natale," the senator jabbed. "In all the years that you were involved in this business, which by anybody's rules is a kind of tough business, you wouldn't deny that, would you?"
"It certainly is,"
parried the mobster. "I'm glad we can agree on that." Then Natale unloaded a roundhouse.
"I'm fighting for my life here. That's why I have to watch what I agree with you on. You have to take that into consideration. I'm not trying to give you a hard time here."
Rudman fired back. "In all those years, you want your testimony before this committee to be that you didn't even know anything about the fact that people like Nicky and Angelo were involved in organized crime?"
"Only what I read in the great free press."
"Which you didn't believe?"
"Of course not,"
said the unflappable Natale.
"I don't think you believe everything you read in the paper too, Senator."
Natale did address the claims by witness Charlie Allen that he spent 10 years as Ralphie's bodyguard.
"What did he do for me? He put me in jail. He never worked for me."
Natale never ceded an inch before security finally shuffled him out of the hearing room and back to the captain's office. The officer knew what the senators wanted from Natale, and he knew the Philadelphia mobster had refused to give it to them. In grudging admiration, he offered Natale a firm handshake.
Jesus Christ, they don't make 'em like you anymore. Thanks. I'm just starting a long bid.
Yeah, I'm sure you're gonna be fine. Which wasn't remotely true at this point. Natale's shot at early release was torpedoed. His family would return to their home without him, or much hope of seeing him free any time soon. His cell at Lewisburg awaited, yet Natale returned to prison with no regrets.
I could have gave them New York, Chicago, Philadelphia.
He shrugs.
I did my time, 16 straight bananas on that one. It just shows you, if I wanted to. But I didn't. It wasn't gonna work for me.
Natale wasn't the only witness called to Washington. Scarfo was subpoenaed and arrived with a small entourage that included a nascent Philadelphia mobster named Joey Merlino. The latter's path would cross with Natale's again, to interesting results 17 years down the road in a far different federal venue. Another summons to our nation's capital came a year later. If the first visit was part of a dog and pony show, the encore was done with far less fanfare. The feds still held out hope of leveraging Natale into a cooperation deal, dangling early release yet again. Nothing changed.
They gave me immunity for everything I ever done,
Natale recalled of his next go-round.
And they did it in a closed room, not for the public. Nobody. It was still the same answer.
22. A Mafia Prince. The brutal murder of his father unleashed something savage in Salvi Testa, the mob prince with an unlikely past and an uncertain future. The boss's son had shown signs of a bright future in La Cosa Nostra while growing up, and his fearsome reputation would land him on the front of the Wall Street Journal, where he was described as the mob's most celebrated figure these days. Natale was not surprised by his ascension.
I loved Salvi. I seen him grow up,
he said years later with respect.
He kind of admired me from afar. Mardon was a killer's killer. No life was killed without reason or sanity.
But his short and criminal life's work was hardly preordained. His father initially steered his son away from the life, and Salvi attended private Catholic schools, graduating from St. John Newman High School. The young Testa attended Philly's Temple University for a year before taking a job as a real estate salesman, working for Bruno's son-in-law. His boss recalled the handsome athletic six-footer as hard-working, conscientious, gentle, and kind. But like the fictional Michael Corleone, the young man found himself inexorably drawn into his father's orbit. Natale was walking with Lucia and one of their daughters to visit a South Philly pediatrician when they ran into young Testa shortly before Natale's 1979 arson arrest and incarceration.
He was walking across the street and he saw us,
Natale recounted of his final meeting with Salvi.
He shouts over, "Ralphie!" and he came over to shake my hand. We talked, and he told me, "My family wants me to go to college and all that. I don't want to do that. I want to do what you do." The mother and father were behind that, going to a good school. But when Phil saw what his son was, Phil wasn't stupid in that regard. Salvi was a real man, a real gangster.
The first evidence of Salvi's lethal acumen had occurred earlier that year, shortly after Philadelphia rang in the new year. The second-generation mafioso made his bones on January 4th, 1979, whacking a drug dealer named Mikey Coco Cifelli inside a South Philly bar. The murder was sanctioned by Bruno and assigned to Scarfo, who selected young Testa and Chucky Merlino to handle the hit at Priori's, on the corner of 10th and Wolf. Cifelli's open dealing of methamphetamine was a slap in the faces of Bruno's neighborhood constituents, and the boss acted quickly to remove this scourge from their streets. When Cifelli ignored a friendly suggestion to take his business elsewhere, a lethal Plan B was unleashed.
Legends, like rivers, must begin at their source, Natale said of the killing, and Priori's was the beginning of Salvi Testa. His true nature surfaced from the core of his being. Even Merlino, who knew him since Salvi was a little boy, couldn't recognize the man now standing in front of him.
The two killers donned ski masks and walked toward Cifelli, who was jabbering on the bar's payphone. The shooters knew when the call would come. Chucky had suggested to a mutual friend that he should call Mikey Coco at this exact time to warn him about the contract on his life. Instead of deliverance, the call brought only death.
"This is for you,"
announced Testa before firing point-blank into his target's skull. Civelli fell silently to the floor, killed so quickly that he had no time to utter a word of protest or a scream of horror. Scarfo drove the getaway car. As Natale heard the tale, Testa walked out of the bar and away from his first killing with the gait of a man casually headed to meet an old friend. The howls of terrified patrons echoed in the winter air behind him. Testa climbed into the shotgun seat alongside little Nicky.
"Did you put 2 in his head?"
asked Scarfo.
"Without a doubt,"
replied the younger, taller, and better-looking shooter, with panache in his answer. Word of his cavalier approach to killing became the talk of the neighborhood, where Salvi Testa received instant respect as the local mob's Rookie of the Year. Things changed after the assassination of Bruno and the rise of Philip Testa to boss. Shortly before his own brutal death, the Chicken Man arranged for Salvi's induction as a made man. Around the same time, Testa's wife passed away. With the hit on his father, the young Testa was an orphan at age 25.
"His mother died of cancer,"
Natale said of the unparalleled mob scion.
"That hurt him, and then to see his father get killed like that, he loved his father. That's what made him what he was, a pure killer."
The mob execution of Phil Testa
took away any chance of Salvi leading a life of any kind of normalcy,
Natale said.
His destiny was now to be Salvi Testa, the coldest of all the killers, who would rise under Nicky Scarfo.
Natale recalled the tale of Salvi's actions on the day of his father's burial, a cold and windy March morning that felt more winter than spring. As the mourners slowly dispersed, young Testa stood in the cemetery among a small group of boyhood friends, offering their support to their precocious leader. He stood among them, not a single tear visible. His stony public face was in contrast to the anguish that Testa felt leaving the hospital emergency room on the night of his father's murder. Testa asked for a few minutes of solitude as he stood by the graves of his parents, ordering the lingering mourners to wait for him by the cemetery entrance. His mother and father were now together forever, and he stood all alone amid the tombstones. Phil Testa's casket had not yet gone into the ground, and his son stood for an hour with one arm extended, touching the coffin. His facial expression was now hard, a metamorphosis
into what he was destined to be, said Natale. The most prolific killer that South Philly had seen since the death of Skinny Razor.
Salvi finally knelt alongside the casket to deliver a solemn vow.
Daddy, I will kill and punish everyone involved with putting you here.
He touched the dirt beneath his knees.
I promised I will put such fear into their hearts that even their dogs will forget how to bark.
His initial instinct was to whack everyone outside his father's inner circle, but his upbringing left Salvi acutely aware of the mob's protocols in such matters, and he was persuaded by new boss Scarfo to wait until the commission gave their approval. The New York families first installed Scarfo as the city's third boss in 13 months, before getting down to the Testa killing. Old pal Manna vouched for Scarfo before the other families as the choice of the Genovese Borgata, with little Nicky installed without opposition. Then Manna laid out the case for Casella as the main force behind this latest bit of mob treachery. The verdict from New York and the family, headed by Gigante, was again brutal and brief. Kill them all, except Casella, who was given a pass by the Chin, banished to Florida under a threat of immediate execution if he ever reappeared. The worst bloodletting in the often gory history of the Philadelphia mob was about to commence with the approval of New York under the shaky hand of Scarfo.
Nicky Scarfo,
Natale said with derision.
Bossed by attrition. The darkness of treachery was about to descend over the Philly La Cosa Nostra. There was no one for Nicky to answer to except the face in the mirror when Scarfo shaved.
Then, and only then, did the Testa kid go about avenging the death of his father in spectacular fashion. On January 7th, 1982, Narducci parked his Cadillac about a half-block from his home in South Philly. A familiar voice called through the darkness. "Hey, Frank." He turned to see Salvi Testa standing a few feet away, a gun in his hand and malice on his face. The mob prince made sure Narducci had a good look at his executioner before pulling the trigger. Again and again and again. "This is for my father," said Testa before he and sidekick Joe Pungatore emptied their guns into the hapless Narducci, leaving his bullet-riddled body in the street.
"Kills him right on the street, leaves his body on the curb,"
recalled Natale with admiration.
Boom! Pop, pop, pop! What this kid did was unreal. Chicky Narducci was a capo. Salvi had Pungatore follow him at a distance for days, see what time he would come home, where he would go, what streets he would use, 'cause Salvi always said, "I'm gonna kill him."
But the killing did little to calm the storm raging inside Salvi Testa, as fellow mobster and future informant Nicholas "Nicky the Crow" Caramandi later recalled while in the embrace of the FBI.
Salvi used to say to me, "I wish that motherfucker was alive so I could kill him again." This is how much he hated this man, the Crow said. He had no mercy on anybody. Business was business, and killing to him was business.
More was to come. Shortly before the first anniversary of Phil Testa's execution, Salvi had a mutual acquaintance summon Marinucci to a meeting at the Buckeye Club. The unsuspecting second-story man arrived to find a murderous Salvi Testa waiting like a frothing pit bull. Testa would kill Marinucci, but only after torturing the mob killer until he gave up another name, Teddy DiPretoro, the turncoat who hid the bomb on Salvi's father's front porch. Marinucci, 30, was found dead on the first anniversary of the mob hit, his body stuffed inside a green plastic garbage bag and dumped in a South Philly parking lot. It was murder with a message. His mouth was stuffed full with 3 unexploded firecrackers, a reference to the explosion of March 1981. His hands were tied with clothesline, and he was shot in the chest, neck, and mouth. DiPretoro was so terrified by word of the execution that he turned himself into police and began singing like a mob version of Philly's own Teddy Pendergrass. He even confessed to the bizarre May 1980 murder of Edward Bianculli, executed for stealing a box of Valentine's Day candy from a store where DiPretoro worked.
He thought he was gonna get off on this Testa thing, and then he said, "I killed this kid," recounted Natale. The conspirator-turned-informant dodged Salvi's payback only by taking a life sentence for both killings. Salvi Testa's fearsome reputation was burnished by a bizarre ability to dodge death. 3 attempts were made on his life as part of a mob war that left 24 bodies scattered around the Philadelphia area. In 1980, he was shot in the groin and the leg after an angry confrontation outside a local restaurant. Officials said the shooting was not mob-related. The next one most definitely was. On July 31st, 1982, Testa was sitting outside a row house near the Italian market when a car carrying a killer drove past. The shotgun blast left Testa in critical condition with buckshot wounds to the abdomen, arms, and legs. Just 5 months later, Testa walked away from a botched hit and gunfight in Washington Square West. Testa, in contrast with his failed assassins, was so fearsome that he didn't need a gun to take a life. The young mobster and several members of his crew stationed themselves outside a jewelry store run by the relative of a mobbed-up rival. Testa occasionally tapped on the window, an added touch of menace. The man closed up shop on the afternoon of December 14th, 1983, marched into his business's walk-in safe, and put a bullet into his head. The legend of Salvi Testa grew. "I don't have to hit anybody," he boasted. "I just have to tell them that I want to talk to them, and they'll do the job for me." Testa emerged as the cream of an increasingly meager crop of Philly mobsters, preordained in the blood of his father to assume the family mantle of boss. He stepped hard on a few toes along the way. He had a public breakup with his fiancée, Maria Merlino, the daughter of underboss Salvatore Chucky Merlino, only weeks before a wedding viewed as a union of mafia royalty. The elder Testa had counseled his son about such affairs of the heart. "Be careful what you say and do with the daughters of my friends." But the young couple had grown up together in the same neighborhood, inescapably brought together at the endless series of baptisms, weddings, and wakes that completed the local circle of life. Their families vacationed together in Margate on the Jersey Shore south of Atlantic City. The two became romantically involved a year before Phil Testa replaced Bruno as boss. Testa also had a much ballyhooed falling out with Scarfo, fueled by rumors started by the infuriated father of the jilted bride. But Natale to this day believes that the move on young Testa had but a single motive, pure envy from little Nicky, who wanted his nephew Leonetti to command the respect given to Salvi by all. Natale heard of a meeting in Scarfo's Atlantic City kitchen just months after the 2 young gangsters were made. His venom erupted into a cascade of insults about Salvi's rise in the Philly mob and the morals of his girlfriend, her affairs before they met. The accusations weren't true, but Nicky spoke as if he was there. He went on and on, spewing about Salvi.
Testa, as the son of the family's longtime underboss, was raised to respect his mob superiors, even those as repugnant as Little Nicky. Despite the warning signs, he showed continued fealty to Scarfo, even carrying the boss's luggage through the Philadelphia airport when the boss returned home after a jail term for a gun charge in Texas. Young Testa was among the crew that flew back with Scarfo in January 1984.
He was a blue blood and respected every rule of La Cosa Nostra, said Natale. That's what killed him. He should have killed Nicky Scarfo immediately after his father's murder. But he grew up with his father as the underboss, so he knew everything about our life because he was brought up right in the middle of it. Poor Salvi put La Cosa Nostra ahead of everything. It was in Salvi's blood, and he couldn't go against the way he was raised. It's like an underground river running beneath all the homes on a block. Sooner or later, everything's gonna go.
And so it did. Scarfo's jealousy of young Testa soon exploded into murderous rage. The demented Atlantic City gangster was frustrated by his inability to reach out to the wily Testa, but he had a plan. Little Nicky reached out to Joe Pungatore, Salvi's best friend. As Natale heard it, Scarfo bluntly explained the options to Pungatore. Kill Testa, or Little Nicky would
kill you, your brother, your whole family.
Pungatore, terrified to stand up to Scarfo, set the wheels in motion to execute his closest friend. Salvi Testa, who had stood alongside Pungatore's father when they were initiated as made men, would now go down because of the son. The message of impending death was delivered to Testa while he was attending a wake for Pungatore's aunt. In a bizarre scene seemingly lifted from an old mob film, Scarfo's underboss Chucky Merlino grabbed Testa's head and planted the kiss of death directly on the younger man's lips as he left the funeral parlor. Pungatore recruited Salvatore Wayne Grande to assist in the murder plot. Grande had also sworn an oath of mafia fealty alongside Salvi just 3 years earlier, and now they were agreeing to murder their friend. Natale, decades later, remains disgusted at the way two lesser men conspired to kill one of the mob's rising stars. How far inferior mafiosi took the life of Salvi Testa.
Instead of them, if they had balls like men, go tell Salvi, this is what they want. They want to kill us. They want to kill you. What do you want to do? Instead, they didn't say a word.
Natale spits.
Wayne Grande wanted to be somebody, go up in the hierarchy of the Philadelphia family. He said, don't worry, I'll bring him to the candy store, I'll kill him. They set him up, lowlifes. When Salvi defecated, they couldn't even be that.
On September 14th, 1984, the unsuspecting Salvi Testa arrived at the candy store on Passyunk Avenue. Grande had already hidden a gun inside the cushions of a couch at the location. Pungatore had already sold out his friend. Testa was shot to death, his body wrapped in a blanket and dumped on a Jersey street, like someone putting out the trash. The mob prince was buried in the family plot alongside his mother and father. No one was left in Nicky Scarfo's way, which was the worst thing that could have happened to his dubious regime. Left to his own devices, Scarfo was already into his gun lap as boss by late 1986, left standing among the ruins of a great family that had once held a seat on the commission with the 5 New York groups. In November, 2 of his top killers, Tommy Del Giorno and Nicky the Crow Caramandi, joined Team USA, becoming federal informants to testify against the head of the family. But he was still in charge when John Stanfa walked out of federal prison in the spring of 1987, unsure if the future rested in a return to the mafia or a slab in a mortuary. 23. Stanfa Redux. While John Stanfa was doing his time, each breath a reminder that he was a lucky man, his Uncle John rose to become a full capo running a crew of Zips under the administration of Gambino family boss Gotti. The Queen's capo ascended to the top spot by orchestrating the Christmas-time killing of Castellano outside a Manhattan steakhouse in 1985, after Big Paul infuriated the Gotti faction with his imperious behavior. Also, Gotti's brother Gene was dealing heroin against family rules. Either way, Castellano was out, and the publicity magnate Gotti was in. John Gambino approached the dapper Don, hat in hand, asking if Stanfa could get a pass for his part in the Bruno execution once he left prison. Gotti was elated by the proposal. A gift of amnesty would solidify his position atop the Gambino family, already under assault by the mighty Genovese Borgata, which had put out a contract on Gotti. The quid pro quo was the full backing of the Sicilian faction going forward. Gotti saw the move as a win-win and cleared the deal to spare Stanfa. Little Nicky, outflanked but trying to save face, insisted that Stanfa never again set foot in Philadelphia, under penalty of death. Stanfa, before even checking in with his parole officer, hustled to a Little Italy coffee shop to meet with John Gambino. The two relatives kissed each other's cheeks, with Stanfa offering his effusive thanks. Gambino explained that the clemency came with a caveat and laid out the details.
"These American gangsters are careless," Gambino said, looking his nephew directly in the eyes. "Scarfo, I hear, has no one to blame but himself. He has put himself in a tight spot." "Well," Gambino shrugged, "that's that. After all, we always heard that he never liked us Zips anyway."
Stanfa's reply was cut off by Gambino, who placed his hand close to his mouth in the old Sicilian style of delivering a message without words. Stanfa fell mute as his uncle simply continued with his thoughts. Yes, the deal was for Stanfa to stay out of Philadelphia. So what if he instead extended an invitation for some of his old friends from the city of brotherly love to visit New York for a cup of espresso? Scarfo's end was near, and the future was wide open. The first invitation went out to his fellow Bruno plotter, Felix Bocchino. Scarfo's inevitable racketeering conviction finally came down in November 1988, with the top members of his crew following him like the Pied Piper into federal penitentiaries. Little Nicky received a 55-year term for 13 murders and attempted killings during his brief and bloody reign. He was also convicted in a separate trial for the 1985 murder of bookmaker Frankie Flowers d'Alfonso, a mob veteran aligned with the family since Bruno's early days as boss. Scarfo's nephew Leonetti, after receiving a 45-year sentence, flipped and became a federal informant. Left behind on the streets of Philadelphia were an assortment of murdered mobsters, the detritus of the savage Scarfo era. Natale, a student of history in Philadelphia and beyond, remained stunned by the swiftness of the once strong family's collapse.
"It took over 300 years for the many Caesars to cause the fall and decline of the great Roman Empire. It only took from the murder of Angelo Bruno in March 1980 to 1986 for Nicky Scarfo to destroy the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra and a generation of loyal but foolish South Philadelphians who followed him, not knowing why."
The door was now wide open for Stanfa, one of the men responsible for the undeserved death of Angelo Bruno, to march across the Walt Whitman Bridge back to South Philly. Bocchino acted as the Zips mob, John the Baptist, spreading the word that Stanfa was coming home. Bocchino began his missionary work after 3 days of scheming with Gambino and Stanfa before returning to Philly, where he visited the wife of imprisoned Goodfellow Joe Chicky Ciancaglini. Could she bring a message to Lewisburg? There was a chance, Bocchino explained, that Stanfa could become boss. If so, the 3 Ciancaglini sons could become made men. No one realized this would equate to signing an order of execution for the next generation of the family in a mafia version of Cain versus Abel, far from the Garden of Eden. Bocchino was certain that Ciancaglini the elder would jump at the chance for a new role, through the proxy of his boys, to again become part of La Cosa Nostra. When the news reached Natale, he was both disgusted and infuriated.
The pity of it all was that no one in Philadelphia had the gumption, or for that matter the prestige, to reach out for someone on the commission to verify that this carpetbagger and killer would rule Philadelphia.
The toughest of the trio, and the most likely to ignore Bocchino's siren call, was Michael, who had already earned the admiration of every up-and-comer in the city. He was good with his fists, better with a knife, deadly with a gun. His best friend was Skinny Joey Merlino, head of his own crew and the son of Scarfo's imprisoned underboss. Michael, Mikey Chang, was enjoying the early spring of 1989 near the recreation center on South 18th and Shunk Streets when Bocchino pulled up in his Lexus. Mikey Chang, holding court outside the building, recognized little Felix immediately. His arrival, without warning, raised hackles among the young tough guys until Ciancaglini put everyone at ease. "It's all right," he declared. "He's a friend of my father and one of those guys." The meaning was clear to one and all. The old man behind the wheel was a good fella. Bocchino walked up to Michael and offered a strong handshake meant to send the message that this was a serious call. Ciancaglini, more than a half-foot taller, looked down on his visitor. Bocchino asked Mikey Chang to take a walk, placing a hand on the younger man's arm to lead him away from the assembled troops. Michael removed his arm from Bocchino's grasp before the two went on a short stroll. Bocchino explained that he was just home from New York and meeting with the Gambinos, when actually it was merely a Gambino, John.
"They've asked me to tell everybody that they are sending John Stamford to form a new family and become the Padrone with me as his advisor on who should be included," Bocchino said before laying on the flattery. "Michael, you and your brothers, plus your friend Joey Merlino, were the only ones I would stand for."
Ciancaglini felt something was amiss. Wise beyond his years, he knew there was only one way to find out what it was. Let Bocchino keep talking. When the 20-minute spiel was done, Mikey Chang said he would speak with Merlino the next day, when he was planning a visit to McKean Prison. He added one other thing. Ralph Natale, imprisoned there as well, would hear the same news.
"Don't take long, Michael,"
Bocchino advised before leaving.
"They want to know in New York."
Ciancaglini later said Bocchino struck him as pure evil. Bocchino left, his job done, but painfully unaware that the young mobster had already thrown in his lot with Natale's plans to reclaim Philadelphia as his own. The next day, he would speak with Ralphie and his pal Merlino in prison to let them know about the overture. 24. A marriage of mob-style convenience. It was a dark, gray, and bitterly cold November day at the snow-covered Federal Correctional Institute, McKean, in Pennsylvania, when a busload of 40 inmates arrived after a 9-hour trip from the Raybrook Penitentiary in upstate New York near the Canadian border. The New York jail was a former Olympic village converted into a prison. Natale was one of the passengers taking the one-way trip. His move to the new facility came as he neared the end of his long jail term, and his security level was dropped. Natale remembered the thought that passed through his head after the mind-numbing trip.
"Another prison. Soon I won't even know what prison I'm in."
He laughed bitterly, thinking of his wife and kids, now in the same state, but still so far away. He reflected back on his father's advice about doing time as the inmates were ordered to form 2 lines, where the corrections officers removed the handcuffs attached to the chains around their waists. The new arrivals, each wrapped in a federal-issued orange jumpsuit, were packed tightly into a holding pen meant to hold maybe 24 men. The guard in charge of processing the inmates awaited, with Natale noticing his nameplate while marching past. The name rang a bell, but Natale had a lot of other things to think about. But, for some unknown reason, Natale became obsessed with the guard's identity, the mystery gnawing at him. A voice in his head warned this needed to be resolved.
"It's going to be important to remember that name."
The guard called the inmates one at a time for assignment to their new residences. When Natale's name was finally announced, he approached the desk. Bingo! He remembered where he knew the name from. During his 9 years in Lewisburg, a foreman at the prison had had the same last name. After the guard and Natale exchanged greetings, Ralph said nothing more. The officer then pointed to his nameplate and asked, "Does this sound familiar to you?" He flashed a smile at the convict. Natale noticed that the man was holding Ralph's prison records and already knew the answer. He leaned close and whispered,
"We had a plumbing shop foreman at Lewisburg with the same name, and for a hack, he was quite a man."
The CO responded in the same surreptitious style. "I'm sure he will be glad to know what you think of him. He's my father."
"If you're 1/10 of what your father was to the men at Lewisburg, you'll be okay."
The second-generation hack immediately told Natale that he would land in the unit run by the young CO. The guard, after speaking by phone with his father and checking the inmate's reputation, summoned Natale the next morning. The old man had vouched for Natale as more convict than inmate, and trustworthy. The CO now approached Natale with an offer. The CO was eager to keep his unit free of problems. Natale could help by reviewing the twice-a-month bus list of incoming inmates and selecting any names that fit the right criteria. "I want guys you know are good, not pieces of shit," he told Natale.
"You got it. I don't want them in here anyway."
4 months later, Natale spied a familiar name headed his way and heard the long-awaited, if unexpected sound of opportunity knocking loudly. Joey Merlino was coming to McKean.
"It's like hitting the lottery," he thought. "When I see his name, I thought, the kid's coming in. I brought him in, I introduced him to everybody who was somebody in there."
Until that very moment, Natale's long-festering bitterness and burning desire to reclaim the mantle of the old Philadelphia mob remained a mostly abstract concept, and now, coming down on the next bus, was a Philly gangster straight from the streets, with details on mob business in their old hometown.
"I had no information at that time. Who was there, who wasn't there," Natale recalled of their initially fortuitous meeting. "I thought, wow, here's a godsend. Funny, me using the word godsend. Maybe the devil sent him."
The processing routine was the same for Merlino as it had been for Natale, waiting while chained to the other inmates as their names were called. When the same CO summoned Joey, the guard assigned Merlino to his unit and advised, "A friend is waiting for you." "Is it Ralphie?" asked Merlino, who was aware through the prison grapevine that Natale was at McKean. Merlino recalled the 1982 Senate hearing, when he had watched the marble-hard mobster uphold his sworn oath of omertà under the most difficult circumstances, at tremendous personal cost. A surge of confidence, like a jolt of electricity, filled Merlino's body. Theirs was a May-December mob romance, star-crossed like many unions of mismatched partners. Natale's vision was clouded with dreams of redemption and revenge. Merlino's commitment to the cause was at least partially steeped in his own knowledge that the bloodthirsty Scarfo, even from behind bars, wanted him dead. After little Nicky was jailed for life, he attempted to run the Philly family from prison through his son Nicky Jr. The family was in shambles after Scarfo had depleted its ranks with murder after murder. Natale, though his hatred of Scarfo burned bright, took little satisfaction from little Nicky's demise.
"To be honest, I don't want to see anyone in jail. I know Ange made me swear on my life that I wouldn't kill him. Don't do it, Ralph. But I wasn't happy about the conviction, not really. I wish he lives 1,000 years now. He's got his own punishment. He has to get up every day and look in the mirror and see the face looking back. He's got a hole in his soul that can never be filled. A sick guy."
Without Scarfo on the street, the opportunity for instant mob advancement was obvious. Joey Merlino was among those who acted on his shot at the big time. On Halloween night, 1989, the younger Scarfo sat with 2 friends enjoying an Italian repast at Dante and Luigi's, a restaurant in South Philly. A man in a Halloween mask approached the table. Rather than a bag filled with candy, he carried a semi-automatic MAC-10 pistol. It was long rumored that the shooter was Merlino, and he pumped 5 bullets into Nicky Jr. The Philly mob scion collapsed as the floor became stained with his leaking blood. Incredibly, not a single bullet struck a major organ or blood vessel, and he survived. The would-be assassin dropped his weapon on the way out, aping the infamous hit scene in The Godfather, where Michael Corleone did the same after killing a mob boss and his NYPD crony. One informant later said that was a message to Nicky Sr., a big fan of mob movies. Whatever the reason, Natale was unimpressed by the botched murder try.
"The guy's sitting down. He had him sitting right there. Joey was scared. Scared."
Nicky Sr., whose opinion mattered more than most, was convinced of Merlino's role and put a $500,000 contract on his life. Scarfo also made sure a personal message was sent to Skinny Joey that no place, behind prison bars or on the Philadelphia streets, would ever insulate him from the deranged ex-boss's deadly reach. Publicly, Merlino put on a brave face. "Give me $500,000 and I'll shoot myself." But Natale remembered the young thug as scared shitless. Merlino landed in prison after a January 1990 conviction for a $350,000 armored car robbery. He faced 15 years but received just 4 from a compassionate judge worried about his mother and 2 sisters surviving without him. His father, noted Philly mobster Chucky Merlino, was already doing 45 years for his work alongside Scarfo. The elder Merlino was dispatched to die in a Texas penitentiary. Joey Merlino was likely to do 2 years, then return to Philadelphia. Natale pondered the situation as he awaited his reunion with the young wannabe gangster. Natale, accompanied by some of his close inmate pals, waited at the front entrance of Hilltop Unit 3 for Merlino. Natale donned a pair of sweatpants and a gray polo shirt for the get-together. Merlino instantly approached the older man and shook hands. Merlino's cocky street persona was a thing of the past as he stood before Natale, who recalled Skinny Joey as frightened yet thrilled by the sight of the old gangster.
He was scared of Scarfo, recalled Natale. Let me put it this way. If he wasn't scared, he was crazy. He was concerned, and I could see it in his face. He looked at me like he was a drowning man, and I was a branch to grab onto.
But Natale saw something else in Merlino's face, almost as if he felt guilty about something. It registered with Natale, but the moment passed.
You don't look any different from when I last saw you in Washington, Merlino finally announced. Boy, I'm glad you're here.
Natale had his reservations about Merlino, but Ralph's single-minded focus led him to overlook any imperfections in the 28-year-old mobster.
I knew what he was, but I needed him. Listen, if I say I was hungry to know who was doing what on the streets, and I thought sooner or later I will straighten this thing out with Merlino. But let him bring these guys in.
Natale introduced Merlino all around, and he was welcomed warmly out of respect for their fellow mafioso. There was Joe Sis of the Gambinos, and Teddy from Baltimore, and even a Philly mobster named Jack Manny. For Merlino, this was like manna from heaven. After living in a haze of fear and paranoia about the Scarfo Jr. hit, Skinny Joey had found his protector.
They all put in for your welcome bag, said Natale. Sweets, coffee, and of course cigarettes. The rest I put in your cell. It's next to mine. Come on, I'll show you where we live.
Natale and his prison comrades all had single cells, and now so did Merlino. Natale departed with the promise of extra towels and a spare pillow.
Get that jumpsuit off and go take a shower, he told Merlino. The water's always good and hot. When you're done, we'll have a good cup of coffee and a few donuts, and then we'll talk.
Mostly, Natale planned to listen. Only then would he explain what the future held for the mob mentor, now in the position of his old pal Skinny Razor and his unlikely new protege. Ralph prepared for the meeting that would change everything by drinking dark coffee alone in his cell, the smell filling his nostrils with thoughts of home. But the ambitious mobster wasn't considering his family's future together back in their old hometown. He thought instead of his long-suffering wife Lucia, shaking his head ruefully at the memory of their sitting together in the kitchen of their old home in suburban New Jersey. The thought passed, and he focused on the business at hand. Natale now recognized the look on the young associate's face as duplicity, bred into Merlino first by his father, and then by the elder Scarfo. Natale dismissed the thought, refocusing on his long-delayed mission of redemption and reclamation. He needed Merlino and his new breed to execute the plan of ascension to the throne of the now scattered Philadelphia family, and to re-establish the Philly mob's seizure of Atlantic City's riches. The first step was filling the shoes once held by old friend Angelo Bruno, and now under control of the backstabbing Stanfa.
I knew I had to act as quickly as possible to put into action what I began to think of on the night when Angelo Bruno was killed, Natale said.
He had long waited for this, never sure when or where it would occur, but always certain it would come. That he never doubted, not for a moment. Natale also knew Merlino ran a crew in the city, where they remained a somewhat unknown quantity even as they hung out with the top mobsters. Merlino's father, Chucky, had been defrocked, booted from his position as underboss, before Scarfo went away for life on the RICO charge. Once the demotion went into effect, the younger Merlino found himself persona non grata in the close-knit world of the local Cosa Nostra. Natale felt one other thing in his bones, one that should have caused him to pause before plunging ahead. Merlino was cut from the same untrustworthy cloth as Testa and Scarfo, the dead and the jailed successors to Bruno. Instead, Natale threw caution to the winds, focused on taking back what was rightfully his. Merlino finally knocked on the cell door. Each man took a seat before the host stood to prepare a fresh pot of coffee and bring out the donuts.
Now you can bring me up to date about what's going on in our hometown, Natale said.
The ball was now in Merlino's court. He could spill his guts or play things close to the vest. Natale had a feeling that things would play out the way he wanted, and Skinny Joey would sign on with Team Ralph. but the younger man had been schooled by his father about the ways of the Philadelphia Cosa Nostra, to never reveal his true feelings about any mob business to anyone. The pair eventually sat side by side, like a penitent confessing to the parish priest. The older man spoke first.
"Tell me, Joey, who appears to be in charge of everything, including Atlantic City, since they put little Nicky away?"
Natale sensed immediately that Merlino grasped the unspoken message that Ralph intended to retake the city as his own, and maybe, just maybe, their own. An obviously pleased Merlino replied without haste, merging his future with Natale's vision for a mob rebirth in the city of brotherly love. "Ralphie, nobody has attempted to put anything together except maybe Nicky Jr., as far as I know. Michael, Ciancaglini, and I have a few sports books turning in to us, and a couple of numbers books from the Yams," a reference to the Black Mafia. "But that's it." This raised the first red flag for Natale. Merlino was a well-known beat artist, hiding behind his father's fearsome rep to stiff bookies on his deep gambling debts. None of the city's gambling operators would trust the degenerate gambler with their money.
"You can't buy a reputation,"
Natale said bluntly in recalling their conversation.
"You have to earn it, and in Merlino's case, that was impossible. Nobody of worth trusted him, on the street or in prison, and that included his family and friends."
So Merlino, his credibility shot, needed Ralphie far more than the mob veteran needed him. Natale owned credibility in spades, even after all his time off the streets, with his ties to the men who had first formed the family, Bruno and Skinny Razor, and his contacts inside the 5 families of New York. Everything was falling into place. Natale was certain that he could forge Merlino and his crew into a hammer to swing hard in his best interests. But he had one final question about Joey's pal Ciancaglini.
"Is Michael capable?"
Translation: Is Michael a killer? "Ralph, he banged out his first when he was 16, Merlino replied, breathlessly. "He's got a fearsome reputation throughout South Philly, with or without a gun. Ralphie, you'll love him. He's like your old partner used to be." Natale enjoyed the reference to his old hatchet-wielding compatriot Mike Marone. High praise, he thought to himself.
"If your Michael is half the man that Mike Marone was," he finally said, "he'll do."
Ciancaglini, like Merlino, was already surrounded by a street crew. The good news kept getting better. Natale, like a surrogate father, finally reached over and placed his open palm on top of Merlino's hand. There was one final question.
"Is Michael on your visiting list?"
The answer was yes. Natale told his young charge to bring Ciancaglini up to McKean for a sit-down as soon as possible.
"I'll have my daughter and wife visit on the same day so we can talk on the visit,"
Natale said.
"Now finish your donuts, and I'll show you where everything is at, including our TV room and the chairs only for us."
Merlino departed with a considerably rosier view of his future and the world outside the prison walls. For Natale, the key was Ciancaglini, a son in a notorious mob clan. His dad, Joseph Chicky Ciancaglini, was of Ralph's generation, a one-time Teamster enforcer and a straight-up killer. He took a bullet during one labor dispute and lived to tell the tale. His rise through the Philadelphia family was aided in large measure by his decision to sell out Sindone in the Bruno assassination, and he wound up behind bars for more than 3 decades after serving under Scarfo. Among Chicky's crimes was the ice pick murder of a rival gangster.
"We grew up together,"
Natale said of the family patriarch.
"Went to Bartlett Junior High. At that time, when I was rising, he knew everybody. He was a goon for Local 107. They were fighting at the time, and somebody shot him with a small caliber. You can catch them almost. Hit him, but didn't do nothing."
His boys followed him into the family business. Mikey enjoyed Ciancaglini, who wound up on opposite sides of the mob war soon instigated by Natale and Skinny Joey.
"Mikey Chang was a gangster,"
Natale recalled with admiration.
"He was the closest thing to Salvi Testa. Mikey was maybe 6'1", up and down. The kid could fight with his hands, and he could shoot, too. But a nice kid, a handsome kid, not a bully, but tough as they come. Made for me."
Natale continued preaching the gospel of Ralph to new recruit Merlino, who hung on every word, every promise. Philadelphia would soon be theirs, and Atlantic City, too. Ralph would serve as the boss, and Joey as his right-hand man and underboss.
"We did a lot of talking,"
explained Natale.
"We swore to one another, hugged and kissed one another. I told him This is going to get serious, Joey. When I come home, there's going to be a lot of action." He nodded, but shaky, and I said, "If nothing's done when I get home, I'm going to clean it up myself." He said, "I know. My father told me about you."
The pair also entered into a pact that the once betrayed Natale considered a sacrosanct vow. No matter how it turned out, if somebody wound up back behind bars or in the ground, the man left on the outside would make sure the other's family was not forgotten. Natale didn't want a repeat of his first jail term, with promises broken and his wife left to fend for herself.
"With Merlino, that meant I'd take care of his girl, his mother, and his 2 sisters," Natale recalled nearly 25 years later. "That meant to me that you make sure no matter what. Because we're going to do a little work. There's going to be a lot of problems." I said, "You remember, 'cause somebody might get lucky with a shot at me. I don't intend it to happen, but you know—"
Mikey Chang, accompanied by his girlfriend and another tough kid named Tommy Horsehead Scafferty, made the trip to McKean 2 weeks after the initial Merlino-Natale summit. Ralph's wife came with 2 of his daughters to the decent-sized visitors' room, where inmates were permitted to sit with the guests of other inmates. The guards, focused on the arrival of Ciancaglini's attractive companion Karen, paid little attention to the other guests. Scafferty, his nickname came from his equine profile, not the infamous scene from The Godfather, boasted a mob lineage like Ciancaglini. Scafferty's brother Torry was a made man, and his grandfather was involved in the mafia. Despite the odd alias, he was good-looking with typically slicked-back black hair. He stayed with Karen as Natale sat down with his fellow inmate and Ciancaglini. Natale looked intently at Michael's face as the 2 men shook hands, looking for any sign of duplicity. Instead, he saw honesty and courage.
"This one's a keeper,"
Natale thought to himself as he laid out the plot first conjured in a Florida prison on the night of the Bruno assassination. He specifically mentioned taking back Local 54, a potential gold mine awaiting them in Atlantic City. Once they had control of the roughly 22,000 union members, Natale explained the family would run the health insurance and severance pension funds. The mob would take $100 per month per member in kickbacks from the insurance brokers running the twin funds. The smiles grew on the young duo's faces as they did the crooked math. 3 mob bosses had died for the pot of gold at the end of Atlantic City's rainbow, and now it was about to land in their laps. This was the time for Natale to find out exactly how serious Mikey Chang and Skinny Joey were about doing what now needed to be done. The 3 men walked to an outside visiting area where Natale lit up one of his favorite H. Upmann cigars, brought as a gift by Ciancaglini. A chill was in the spring air as they stood together. The younger men had heard tales of Natale from their relatives, but they would hear firsthand this day exactly what the old hand was capable of doing. Natale bit off the end of his cigar before carefully lighting up, rolling the smoke to get the perfect ash, a trick he learned in his youth. As he spoke, the other 2 leaned in so as not to miss a word.
"First things first. Michael, do you have the type of men who are ready to do what has to be done? Remember, the greater the fortune, the greater the risk. There are many people, from the New York families who, if they become aware of what's really at stake, will be willing to risk their lives or take lives if necessary for that amount of money. We must act now, before anyone else becomes aware of what can be done in Atlantic City. With your help, this will be ours again."
Natale assured the 2 that Chicago would back their play in return for his years of silence while behind bars, and he explained, looking at Michael and ignoring Joey, that the process would require bloodshed and a big set of balls. It would also start immediately.
"We must take back the streets of South Philly with a bang and send that message to everyone who is sniffing what belongs to us," Natale said. "Remember, Michael, I'm doing this sentence for some people in New York as well as Philadelphia. It's important that I show real strength from here in prison, so when the time comes, the commission will recognize us."
Michael had a question. "Ralph, do you want us to let everybody know, no matter who they are, what we intend to do?"
"Without a doubt,"
Ralph shot back.
"Because that's the only way to find out who the snakes are, and as sure as the day follows night, they will show themselves. And then, my young friend, if you're the man Joey says you are, you won't have to take a ride back here for me to tell you what must be done. After you do what you have to do, all the snakes will disappear."
Ralph was almost done with his young acolytes, who sat mesmerized as he spoke. Natale asked a final question about the street situation in the city. Was anybody running his mouth about taking control of the family with Scarfo behind bars? Ciancaglini immediately mentioned Louis Irish DeLuca, operator of an after-hours club and a downtown drug dealer. DeLuca was palling around with Natale's old sidekick Ronnie Turchi, and was bad-mouthing both Merlino and Ciancaglini. "Chirping inside his club whenever he gets high, in front of anybody who will listen," Michael reported. Natale smiled and began to speak softly, almost as if reciting poetry, but his words sounded more like an obituary. "Louis Irish, with his own words like many egotistical men, composed his own epitaph. So, Michael, when you finally take all of his thoughts and dreams from him, everybody who mistakenly thought he was somebody will know it came from the people he talked about. And these people made him a nobody." The meeting was finished, and the two young mobsters were on board. Natale stood between Merlino and Ciancaglini, his hands on their arms, as they marched in unison toward the visiting room. Ciancaglini took Ralph's advice to heart: strike fast and strike hard. At 1 a.m. on May 24, 1990, as DeLuca drove his burgundy 1986 Cadillac toward home, the Natale faction lashed out. Two shooters surprised Louis Irish, blasting through his car windshield at the helpless businessman. 3 of the gunshots found their mark, and the 54-year-old club owner was dead. He was unarmed, with $129 cash in his pockets. Mikey Chang, living up to his advanced billing, was one of the gunmen. Those were the first bullets fired in Natale's quest to take everything back. They were far from the last. The killing of Louis Irish sent a message, but many others had a higher rank on Natale's hit list of revenge. The top spot for a bullet unquestionably belonged to John Stanfa, one of the conspirators in the 1980 killing of Bruno. For Natale, getting rid of the man who killed his beloved and respected boss was nearly as exciting as the prospect of becoming the boss. "That's stuck in my craw," Natale said of Stanfa's role in the murder. "I thought for years, when I get home, I'm gonna kill him and everybody around him. The young guys knew. Their fathers and their uncles told them Ralphie's crazy. He talks nice, but he's crazy. He'll kill him right then and there, and I would have, 'cause he was involved in it. I sent word back to the street, I'm gonna kill them. That was on record, and history rolls on." Another prime target was off the streets. Scarfo, who'd run the family into the ground while lining his pockets and stiffing Lucia. "I really wanted to kill Scarfo," Natale continued. "I know that sounds terrible, but that's how I felt. And it would have gotten done. I wasn't Superman, but I was pretty good at my job. Or he would have killed me, I know that. But I never thought it could happen." Natale arranged the murder of 2 other mobsters to ease his eventual return to the streets. Felix Bocchino, the man who delivered the shotgun that killed Angelo Bruno, was gunned down on January 29, 1992 by Mikey Chang after trying to shake down Merlino's uncle, Shiki Baldino. Ciancaglini visited Natale in prison to deliver the news of his ultimate rebuke to Bocchino's overtures on behalf of Stanfa. Bocchino was shot 4 times in the head through his car window. It was a textbook hit: fast, economical, lethal. 4 months later to the day, James "Jimmy Brooms" D'Addorio was shot to death while speaking on the phone at the end of the bar inside the Vulpine Athletic Club in Philadelphia. 2 men wearing black hats pumped a half-dozen bullets into the helpless victim, who made the mistake of openly pledging his allegiance to the Stanfa faction, often loudly, after a few drinks in local bars. The murder was done strictly as a message that the Natale faction was coming, and anyone standing in their way faced the same fate. One more vitally important detail had to be handled. Natale didn't want to make a move without some sort of approval from the commission in New York. The proposition was dicey at best, given that he had a few years left on his arson and drug convictions. But fortune and the federal prison system smiled on Natale. He was transferred to Danbury, Connecticut, where his fellow inmates included one-time Lucchese family boss Vic Amuzzo and Raymond Patriarca Jr., son of the legendary New England crime boss. Amuzzo reached out to Natale, and the two sat together in Amuzzo's cell drinking coffee and eating Entenmann's donuts. "That was a big deal," Natale remembered. The next night, the mobsters from New York, Philadelphia, and New England gathered for a chat. Natale, cards close to his prison jumpsuit, launched into his Stanfa gambit. Natale asked Amuzzo to send a message to jailed Gambino boss Gotti, asking whether Stamfa's regime was sanctioned by New York. Amuzzo, convicted in the infamous New York Windows prosecution, interrupted Natale.
He can't be the boss. We had a meeting, all the new bosses, when they sent the old commission away. The first rule they made was no foreign-born Italian mafiosi of La Cosa Nostra could ever be a boss in the United States, so I know he's not the boss.
Natale asked if there was a way to find out how Stamfa was approved. It turned out approval came from John Gambino, his relative and the Italian-born Gambino capo. When an intermediary finally posed the question to Gotti, the dapper Don dismissed the Philly pretender.
John Stamfa? Gotti sniffed. Who knows him?
That was good enough for Natale, who told his young underlings that the word had come down from on high. Stanfa could not serve as boss. Natale's new cohorts, including Merlino, sprung from prison in April 1992, seemed unable to grasp the enormity of this decree directly from two members of the mob's highest authority.
When I told those idiots, when I sent word, they said, "It can't be," Natale recalled with a tone of incredulity. They didn't believe me. Mikey Chang was allowed to visit me, and I said, "Listen, this is what Vic Amuzzo told me. He is not the boss. He never will be. He will not be the boss in a million years. Stamfa had no right to make anybody. He was never the boss."
Natale then gave Ciancalini specific and savage instructions on dealing with Stamfa in his absence.
"I told Michael, when this punk John Stamfa calls to meet you, you make sure you and Joey go in there loaded up." I knew Stamfa would call them because that's what the Sicilians do. And I said as soon as they open the doors to let you in, kill everybody. The city's ours. They didn't do that because Joey Merlino talked Michael out of it. Merlino was broke when he got home, so he told Michael, "Come on, we'll go and shake guys down and use Stamfa's name, and when Ralph comes home, I'll tell him." Michael says, "But Ralph told me," and Joey said, "Don't worry about it. He ain't coming home for a while."
So when Merlino sat down with Stanfa on April 28, 1992, the pretender to the mob throne walked away unscathed.
"And don't Michael get killed by Stamfa,"
Natale said. He did, in a manner worthy of Shakespearean tragedy. The Stanfa-Natale war left the Ciancalini family a house bitterly divided as Michael threw in with Ralphie, while his brother Joey remained aligned with the ruling regime as its underboss. According to Natale, Big Brother Joey fired the first shot in the family feud in March 1992.
"Mikey claimed his brother had set him up," Natale recounted. "Two North Jersey guys were in a car with his brother. He came home from the gym to his house, and he heard a car door slam, and he saw the two guys. They shot the windows out of the house where Mikey's wife and young kids lived. He claimed his brother was in the car, so you gotta do what you gotta do."
Mikey Chang escaped by diving through the front doors. The shotgun blast tore up the brick facade of his home. The reciprocal deed was done on March 2, 1993, as Joey Ciancalini arrived to open his Warfield Breakfast and Lunch Express shortly before 6 a.m. An FBI surveillance camera captured the grisly sights and sounds. 30 seconds of gunfire and the screams of a waitress after several men were seen bursting in on their stunned target. Joey Ciancalini, shot 5 times in the ear, cheek, and eye, incredibly survived the hit attempt. He fought with the medics trying to save his life, and was handcuffed before the EMTs could load him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. The killers, to Natale's continued incredulity, fled the scene with their target still breathing.
"They didn't know how to kill him," former hitman Natale said bluntly. "They shot him, but he lived. These things happen. And Michael didn't shoot his brother. That's bullshit. He wasn't there."
Ciancalini was left permanently crippled, blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, both physically and mentally disabled, left to walk with a cane. His Stamfa colleagues were left to handle the payback, with the Sicilian-born boss caught on a wiretap in the spring that year ordering the murders of Mikey Chang, Merlino, Natale, and fellow mafioso Gaeton Lucibello. Stamfa had specific directions. Merlino and Ciancalini were to be buried in quick-drying cement, and Lucibello's tongue was to be cut out. He called for a welcome-home treat for Natale once the old-school mobster walked out of prison.
"He's gotta go," Stamfa announced. "I don't even want to give him time to breathe the air."
Ciancalini never saw his concrete coffin or the bullet that killed him. On August 5, 1993, as Mikey Chang and Joey Merlino walked along Catherine Street around 1:30 p.m., two shooters in baseball caps opened fire in a brazen daylight mob hit. Ciancaglini died from a single bullet that struck him in the arm and wound up hitting his heart. Merlino was shot in the legs and buttocks, a clear indication of the shooter's ineptitude. The killer sped off in a waiting car that was dumped and torched about 35 blocks away. The missed opportunity to wax Skinny Joey was emblematic of Stanfa's dopey crew. Another proposed hit by the family failed when the hitman loaded his shotgun with the wrong size shells, and a previous murder plot against Merlino featured a one-time exotic dancer brought aboard to slip cyanide into his drink at a nightclub. That one failed as well. Natale believes Merlino bears the blame for Ciancaglini's murder.
Joey made the snowballs, and he had Michael throw them. Poor Michael got killed because he didn't listen to me.
Natale was in the prison weight room working out when he heard about Ciancaglini's violent demise. The distraught Don dropped a 40-pound weight on his finger, taking the tip right off.
All I felt was the pain of missing him, Natale recalled. I felt sick to my stomach, and I thought, I'm going to straighten this out.
But Natale didn't feel any guilt about enlisting young Mikey Chang to the cause of his redemption.
I didn't feel responsible for his death. This was my life, and that was his life. I did what I did, and I was responsible for my life. We're all responsible for our own lives.
Vengeance came quickly, if not successfully. On the morning of August 31st, Stanfa was riding with his son Joe in a Cadillac Seville, when a van with gun holes carved into its side pulled alongside on the Schuylkill Expressway and opened fire. The 23-year-old Joe was hit in the face, with a bullet lodging behind his cheekbone. One of the Cadillac's tires was blown out, with driver Fred Aldrich somehow steering the crippled car to safety. Aldrich predictably told the cops that he saw nothing. Natale was stunned that his young charges had somehow missed their target.
I wanted to kill John Stanfa, not his son. The guy who was supposed to shoot Stanfa missed and hit the son. Dopey bastards. The kid got shot accidentally. All you have to do is block the car from the front, get another car right behind, and somebody gets out and shoots. End of story.
The botched Stanfa hit turned the Philly War into national news, with the New York Times weighing in with a piece on the battle for the family leadership. Philadelphia braces for increase in mob violence, read their typically understated headline. It took barely 2 weeks for the Natale faction to lash out again, with Stanfa loyalist Leon Yanni Lanzilotti shot in the face as he walked along 8th Street in South Philly. Police said the diminutive bookmaker was ambushed by 3 ski-masked shooters who left him to die. Though his blood flowed like a red river along the sidewalk, Lanzilotti survived the murder try. The new generation of gangsters had twice lived up to their mocking reputation as the gang that couldn't shoot straight, to quote the classic Jimmy Breslin mob book. Before finally coming home, Natale had a strange encounter in Danbury. One of his fellow inmates was Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero, the unfortunate mafioso who broke FBI undercover Joe Pistone into the Bonanno family to disastrous results, and a hit movie where Ruggiero was played by Al Pacino. When the two men met, Natale felt that the past was the past. They were still a couple of made men in the same prison. Respect was due and given.
I never mentioned the streets, Natale recounted. We shook hands, we hugged. The hug was a problem with some of the made guys who still remembered how he brought a rat in. I stood up for him and told all those guys, I was me in those days. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
In 1993, as Natale prepared for his release from prison and ascension to boss, news reached Ralph about the turncoat Charlie Allen. Karma had come finally knocking for the treacherous one-time member of the Natale crew. The informer went into the Witness Protection Program, living in a leafy Virginia suburb under the name William Terry. He was married to a woman with a stepdaughter, and she came forward that year with allegations that Allen had sexually abused her for 13 years, starting when she was a 4-year-old. Allen told the girl that if she ever said one word, he would execute her mother and grandmother and force her to watch the killings. Charlie Allen was convicted of rape and sodomy. A judge sentenced him to 45 years in prison, where he died of cancer.
He had a nice little home. He was living with a woman, said Natale. This was where he should have ended. But this is where he ended, full of cancer in the joint. That's what he was.
25. Don't call it a comeback. Natalie returned home on September 23, 1994, breathing the fresh air of a free man for the first time in 16 years. Once his lungs were filled, his eyes grew wide with anticipation. The paroled Natalie was determined to restore the family and retrieve what was taken from him. For some, the reality is never as sweet as the dream that preceded it. That was not the case for Ralph Natale. He assumed the mantle of family leadership as if slipping into a pair of old slippers, sliding comfortably into the seat without a second thought, his destiny fulfilled.
"I felt like I was born for it," he said. "That's simple. Because I did what I had to do. I got all the requirements, and here I am. And I didn't give nobody up. That's part of the record. There was no way I would come back and walk away from things. Why would I? I just did 16 straight years, lost everything that I had. Atlantic City was thriving."
He even reached out to his old union pal Ed Handley with word that he intended to seize control of the local unions once more.
Guess what he said? "With my blessing." "Why wouldn't he?" said Natale. "He didn't have to do a day. They wanted him in the worst way in that Senate hearing."
There was a Bon Voyage celebration at the prison, hosted by Genovese capo Federico Fritzi Giovanelli, accused of killing a New York detective.
"What a send-off," Natale remembered. "Fritzi and all the maid guys, you never saw anything like it. Sandwiches, sodas, what a scene."
A homecoming party was thrown by his family, with various generations of the Natale clan in attendance. Natale was barred from Philadelphia, so the fete was hosted elsewhere by his Aunt Dolly, mother of the turncoat Raymond Bernard.
"She saw me. She said, 'Ralphie, can I talk to you?'" he recalled. "We hugged and we kissed, and she said to me, 'Ralphie, don't kill Raymond.' 'Cause she knew what he did. Cost me all those years. I said, 'Kill him.' How could I kill my Aunt Dolly's son? I can't do that. Figure that one out. I can't do that."
Absent from the party was Nemesis Stanfa, already behind bars on a racketeering rap. He was arrested and jailed in March 1994, convicted the next year, and sentenced to die behind bars. Natale would never get a shot at his number one nemesis. Philly's Black Mafia also arrived at Ralphie's Pennsauken, New Jersey penthouse, bearing a multicolored robe as a welcome home gift. Their cohorts doing time in Lewisburg had vouched for the new Philly boss as a stand-up guy.
"I don't know how much they paid for it," he still marvels. "And they told me, 'If you need us, we are here for you.' They asked for permission to visit with some friends of mine, and I said, 'Come right up.' They loved that, and why not? They knew my reputation, and I knew theirs. They were all gentlemen, straight up. My wife was there."
The new boss remembers their assurance that he would have their support in all endeavors.
"They said, 'We got your back, let us know,'" he recalled. And I said, "Hey, I ain't that old, you know."
One and all shared a good laugh before the guests headed out. But Natale was now head of the most dysfunctional crime family in the United States, and perhaps in the long history of American organized crime. Not that it felt that way to him.
"There's only one boss in Philadelphia," he declared after leaving prison. "That's Ralph Natale, and that's where the fuck it's at."
Natale once again set up shop at the racetrack in Cherry Hill, operating with impunity out of the Currier and Ives restaurant. He was astounded and delighted after all his time away by the discovery of simulcasting.
"Even when the track is closed, you could bet on all the races from every track. That was something new to me. Wow, you can bet everything."
He was at the track as usual one afternoon when an old friend appeared to offer his assistance to the new boss.
"Blinky Palermo came to see me, with his driver, Red. I never knew his real name," Natale recalled with delight about the reunion. "Blinky looked pretty good, but he's old, 91, 92 years old. They come up wearing the old double-breasted suits, clean, with the white shirts, immaculate. We hugged, we kissed, we had lunch, we laughed. And then he leaned over to me. He was a shooter. He buried a few people, you know, out in the street, whatever. And he said, 'You know, I'm still capable.' Oh, I loved him. He meant it. I said, 'I know. Don't you dare think I don't. Let these young punks do what they gotta do. We'll see what they got.' And in the end, they didn't have too much in them, as men."
Palermo was an anomaly among the men who made up the Philadelphia mob of the 1990s. The high-rolling Natale was stunned by the way his new associates carried themselves, living at home with their mothers, driving other people's cars, working nickel-and-dime scams.
"They were all dead out," Natale recounted. "But what am I going to do, use mannequins? I needed somebody."
One of his first decisions in the top seat came back to bite him. A soldier named Ronnie Previty, a rotund ex-Philadelphia police officer, was with the Stanfa faction, and Merlino agitated for his murder. Natale was unconvinced by his young partner's arguments.
When I came home, I hooked up with Ronnie, Natale recalled. We used to hang out. Joey Merlino wanted to kill everybody, including Previty. I said, did this guy ever do anything with a gun? No? Then it's over. That's enough killing. You can't kill everybody. Previty wasn't a shooter. Well, I let him live. And he came up wide at the racetrack, recorded everything.
A busy Natale set quickly to re-establishing the family's preeminent role in the Philadelphia underworld, ignoring the conditions of his parole, strict guidelines about where he could go and whom he could see. He reached out to the owner of a banquet hall on Front Street, typically used for weddings and other family parties. Natale had a different kind of party in mind.
First, we had a big meeting in the family, he recalled. I said, who took all the action? The numbers, the bookmaking, the loan sharking, and they told me, this guy has this guy has that. I said, hold on 1 second.
He arranged for a weekday event at the hall, catered with plenty of food and booze. Then he dispatched his mob minions to contact every bookie, loan shark, and numbers hustler in the city, and issue an invitation that none dared decline, directly from Natale.
I said, tell them I'm asking. See, they didn't trust Joey Merlino. When he used to bet, he'd lose the whole bank. Everybody knew him. He was like John Gotti. He didn't pay. Now I'm saying, tell them Ralphie wants to see him. Tell them I want to see them all, and if I have to call again, there's going to be a problem. Because they knew my reputation before I went to Lewisburg. They knew what I meant, and they all show up.
The buffet and open bar awaited, as did Natale, with his underboss Merlino and consigliere Turchi. The new ruling triumvirate put their guests at ease before bringing them into a room, one at a time, where the mood was far less welcoming. Natale did the talking. He wasted no words in laying out the new rules. None of the visitors saw the weapon he carried in case additional persuasion was needed.
I'm going to talk, he said by way of opening. It's not for you to talk. When I ask you a question, you have to answer. I know what you're doing. I'm not here to put you out of business.
Natale would summon one of his underlings to join the party and resume the monologue.
You know him? He's your new partner. Now, if you need money, ask him. We'll make sure you get that money for a certain fee. But he's your partner for all your action, and nobody can fuck with you for the rest of your life.
Natale, once finished, flashed a Cheshire cat grin. Each and every attendee responded the same way to his proposal.
Every one of them said, it sounds fair. And I said, it is fair, because I always began and ended with this. Everything illegal in the city of Philadelphia belongs to La Cosa Nostra. That's us. Our friends die, our relatives die because of this. Get that through your head. Never think different. If not, you have a problem. They knew I would have killed them. If I had to, I would have banged one of them right in the head just to make sure.
His ragtag mob army was soon reaping the financial benefits. BMWs, big-screen TVs. Life was good, until it wasn't. Natale's inclusion of Turchi in his mob administration provided a perfect illustration of his mob acumen. His old pal had plotted to kill Ralphie once he came back to the city. Word of the planned hit reached Natale 2 days after he came home, when the kid hired by Turchi as the shooter was overheard discussing the murder plot in a Philadelphia pizzeria. The wise old head remembered the adage to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. There was a personal aspect, too. He had known Turchi since the days when the young mobster played shortstop at Southern High, getting drafted by the Phillies. His career ended 2 weeks later when Turchi stabbed a man in a bar fight, and the two were convicted together in the Mr. Living Room arson. Turchi took the hit and did his time and never opened his mouth.
I made him the consigliere because I felt sorry for him, Natale said. He thought he was more than everybody. He was a killer, stone cold. But how can I kill him? I knew him since I was a kid. He might want to kill me, but he'd never be a rat. Turchi? Never.
Ralphie was right. Turchi went to his grisly death in October 1999 without ever speaking to the feds. His naked body was found face down in the trunk of a car, his hands and feet bound with 2 bullets to his head, which was wrapped in a plastic bag to prevent any blood spatter.
They told him they were going to make him, and they killed him,
recalled Natale. A scene right out of Goodfellas, where Joe Pesci's character was dispatched in similar fashion. Natale, decades after his initiation ceremony with Gambino and Bruno, agreed to be remade when Merlino approached him with an invite to become a made man. Though unnecessary, Natale accepted the offer in the interest of keeping the peace among his factions. The ceremony was held in a suite at the Hilton Hotel near Veterans Stadium, with a gun and a knife in the room. Both men swore an oath of omertà to the family, and each acknowledged their souls would burn in hell if they broke their word.
"I never told him, that punk, that I was already made by the two biggest guys," Natale said. "But he wanted to show everybody what he had. Ralph Natale. None of them would have gone near Joey Merlino if he didn't have Ralphie."
Given the option, Natale said,
"I wouldn't have made him."
The boss nevertheless embraced Merlino as second in command of the family, even making a public proclamation that Skinny Joey was under his personal umbrella of protection.
"What was I going to do by myself?" he offered in self-defense. "Go out on the streets and take numbers personally? I told everybody, if you think you're going to get near that kid, you're going to have to kill me first." And then he forgot that I put my life on the line for him.
Once Natale was embraced as the new boss, a summons came from the Gambino family for a sit-down. The New Yorkers had backed Stanfa from the start, and they were now waving a white flag.
"Me, Joey, and Ronnie Turchi took a trip up to New York," said Natale. "Gotti was in jail, and they had 3 top captains running the family. They asked me to do them a favor. Please don't kill Mikey Cheng's brother or Stanfa's son. I said, why kill them? Okay. Then he brought me in the back. "Ralphie, you gave your word." I said, "Don't say any more. My word is good."
Natale wasn't surprised by the call for compassion for the 2 survivors of the war.
"Lots of times it happens that if a guy survives a hit, they'll give you a pass."
The first target once Natale landed in Philadelphia was William Vesey, killed just before his brother, mob capo John Vesey, was scheduled to testify in a mob trial about the murder of Ciancalini and a failed hit on Merlino. The man known as Billy was gunned down on October 5th, 1995, after picking up donuts on his way to work. Ralph later testified that one of the killers was a third Ciancalini brother, John. The killing of William Vesey was direct payback for the Mikey Chang murder.
"It was brother for a brother,"
Natale told the FBI. The next bump in the road for the Natale regime came from northern New Jersey, where capo Joseph Sodano operated as a major earner for the Philly Group: illegal video poker machines, loan sharking, and fencing stolen goods. Natale heard from his friends in New York that Sodano was also working with some of the families in the city, rather than exclusively for him. This did not sit well with Natale. The new boss summoned all the Philadelphia-connected guys in Newark to come south and sit face-to-face. Sodano, to his detriment, declined the invitation, instead sending a cash-stuffed envelope back to Natale with mobster Philip Filife Casale.
"Full of Franklins," Natale recalled. I said, "Bring it back to him. Tell him I want to see him man-to-man." Philly said, "Ralph, this guy thinks you want to kill him." I said that his underwear must be dirty. That's the old saying. You never show up if your underwear's dirty. I said, "Tell him nobody wants to kill him." And he never came.
Now somebody wanted to kill him. Natale instructed family associate Peter Pete the Crumb Caprio that the clock was running. Sodano must be killed within a week.
I sent word, "Pete, if he's not dead within a week, I'm going to come out of retirement and I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to embarrass all of you. And who knows what else I'm going to do while I'm up there," Natale recalled. He knew what I meant. Sodano was dead within a week.
Sodano, with 2 bullets to the head, was found behind the wheel of his SUV, left in the parking lot of a Newark senior citizens complex on December 7, 1996. The contract went to Casale, who wasted little time in tracking his target down. When the Crumb flipped and joined the feds, he recalled Natale's exact order: "We gotta bang this guy out." Only a few months earlier, Natale endured one of his darker days with the death of an old mob friend. He was at the track in May 1996 when Palermo's driver appeared late one afternoon. The boss was holding court in the clubhouse. "Nice room, $100 window, $50 window, free food," he recalled. "At about 4:30, I'm buying everyone drinks, and as soon as I saw red, I knew Blinky died. I had that feeling. He comes over. I've got bad news. He died the night before last. We cremated him yesterday. He wanted to be cremated. He left me something to give you." Red reached into his suit and produced Blinky Palermo's glasses. He solemnly presented the eyewear to the boss.
"That comes from when Julius Caesar was with the Mafia," Amisti Natale said of the long-standing tradition. "That's from one man to another man, showing the respect for the man who's still alive. Let him look through these glasses and see things the way I saw them."
Natale treasured the posthumous gift until his wife lost the glasses in a mix-up with their cars.
"I almost divorced her because of that. I'm not kidding. But let bygones be bygones, because I'm not Little Boy Blue over here either.
He speaks the truth. Shortly after returning home, Natale, living large after his time in lockup, took up with a much younger blonde mistress, a friend of his youngest daughter's named Ruth Ann Seccio. Natale spotted his future Guma sunbathing poolside in a bikini. 6 months later, the two were a scandalous item, tooling around in Natale's white Eldorado with its blue leather seats. Many in the mob were distressed by their bosses chasing a 20-something Philly girl while his wife sat at home. It was unseemly. Natale, looking back, doesn't disagree.
The life I led, especially when it came to marriage, wasn't right. I regret that. The only regret I have, you know? Ever hear that Sinatra song, Regrets? I've had a few, but too few to mention?
After the death of his friend Blinky, Natale returned to plotting the deaths of others. On May 29, 1996, video poker power broker Anthony Tony Machine's Milicia was sitting behind the wheel of his Ford Explorer just a short block from one of his clients, Bonnie's Capistrano bar. Milicia survived after taking a bullet to the back, and his face was cut by flying glass. Milicia was shot after balking at Natale's demand for a cut of his weekly poker machine intake, which generated profits of close to $1 million a year. Once Milicia saw the light through the shattered glass of his car windows, all was forgiven. He and Natale subsequently met for drinks at a South Philadelphia bar.
"He wasn't a bad fella," said Natale. "I was glad he did survive."
Natale, in short and violent order, had restored some of the mob's old money-making cachet. Previty recalled that,
"Every day was a different felony. I thought about nothing but making money from the minute I got up until the minute I went to bed."
That same year, Natale spoke about his preferred method of handling mob problems. He advocated the beating of one mob associate,
"'cause he answered me in a tone that he wasn't supposed to be doing."
Unfortunately, the conversation was captured by an FBI bug, and so were many more. On one, Natale ranted about the cowardly rats now so prevalent in his chosen field.
"In life," he declared, "you have to do the right thing and be a man."
His take on Atlantic City, long the family's crown jewel.
"If we don't become successful in Atlantic City, we ought to put weights around our necks and jump in the river."
Even though Natale was paranoid about FBI ears, he couldn't stop himself from talking. Soon, everyone would know everything there was to know about boss Ralph Natale. 26. Where did it all go wrong? By 1998, the Philly mob was lousy with rats and wiretaps as the FBI prepared to take down Natale and his crew. The feds were soon listening to Natale's every word about every aspect of the Philadelphia mob, tapping the racetrack restaurant along with his home telephone, his kitchen, his TV room, and the balcony of his Pennsauken, New Jersey penthouse. A video camera was even installed at the track to collect images of the mobsters at work and play. Even worse, Previty used his new lease on life to wear a wire and record hundreds of conversations.
"Well, I was and I wasn't surprised by all the bugs," Natale reflected. "How much money they spent. They wired the whole racetrack, my phones, everything. How many millions of dollars they spent. And we talked about things. Assholes."
The word was soon out. Indictments were on the way, and soon Natale reached out to Merlino about the very uncertain future.
"I told Joey, you do what you gotta do. Don't forget my wife." And he said, "Nah, don't worry, Ralph."
Ralphie next sat down for a conversation with Lucia and shared the bad news. His message to her was simple.
"Listen, I don't know what the hell's coming down. They say a big indictment. Whatever. Don't worry about nothing. Joey and the crew made a commitment to me. They will bring over an envelope every month, so don't worry about it."
Natale never stopped fighting to protect what he had reclaimed. On March 18, 1998, Anthony Tura was shot in the right eye and the back by a killer in a ski mask and a black jacket. The 61-year-old accused drug dealer was plotting to murder Merlino and seize Skinny Joey's gambling business, and even worse, was caught doing so during a secretly recorded conversation with an FBI informant. One of his proposed methods of murder for Merlino, throwing hand grenades in Joey's house to
blow him from here to kingdom come.
The tape was played in open court. Tura, already fighting terminal cancer, went to the grave before a jury could render its verdict on his conspiracy and racketeering charges.
"There's a lot of people I saved from killing," said Natale. "Now a guy wants to throw a grenade in your house? You can't let a guy talk that way. Joey came to me and I said, get it done. There were certain things you can do, and certain things you can't. At least that's how I felt.
Natale went away before any indictments were returned, popped on a parole violation on June 11, 1998, and done in by his unapologetic embrace of his position atop the family. Though barred from contact with organized crime figures as part of his release, Natale was caught on surveillance on at least 10 occasions consorting with his fellow mobsters. He had also ventured into Philadelphia without approval from his parole officer. The arrest didn't come as a total surprise. 1 week earlier, the courteous agents of the FBI told Natale and Skinny Joey they were captured on audio and video at a South Philly birthday party for the boss and his underboss. The two were also spied together in Cherry Hill at an unopened restaurant, and at the Greenhouse restaurant in Margate, New Jersey. Natale was leaving his home in the Cooper River Plaza South around 11:15 a.m. when he was greeted by 4 deputy U.S. Marshals and a Camden County Sheriff's Office. Parole violations, unlike the typical arrest, require no court hearing. The boss was taken directly to jail, where he would remain until the State Parole Commission would hear his case. Joey Merlino, in a stunning development unthinkable only a few years earlier, was now in line to become the street boss of the family. Natale figured this was the tip of the iceberg. He was right. Brevity alone had taped enough chatter to put everyone away for a long time. Shortly after Merlino's birthday celebration, it was almost time to blow out the candles on the Natale era. Natale, though off the streets, couldn't stay out of trouble. A week later, his son-in-law was busted for running a methamphetamine ring and for possession of a .45 caliber automatic weapon. 1 year later, the Philly boss found himself indicted again on drug charges, accused of financing the operation. Previty's tapes offering the most damning evidence.
My son-in-law, he was a carpenter, and at night he would make meth, Natale explained. He said, I need some money. Okay, here you go. They all knew I was putting the money up for it. They arrested him, whatever.
And then one word of dismissal.
Amateurs.
Natale shrugged off the June 1999 indictment.
Why would it drive me crazy? Number one, every crime family in the country has drugs. That's bullshit that they don't. That's what started this thing. Lucky Luciano was the biggest pimp ever. White slavery, imagine that. And of course drugs. That happened. They all have it. Everybody's got a connection. It's all bullshit. Don't do drugs, we'll kill you. Well, go ahead and kill me. Don't do drugs? Everybody's doing drugs. Angelo Bruno's legitimate partner, Long John Martirano, was one of the biggest meth dealers in the city of Philadelphia. Also heroin early in his career. Ange knew that and still made him a legitimate partner.
The indictment actually came as a relief. The grand jury returned no homicide charges from the Philly mob war, and Natale knew Lucia would be taken care of this time. He had Joey Merlino's word.
I get indicted? No money, he said,
bile in his voice.
I thought a couple of murders were going to come up, too. Never happened. Joey Merlino told everybody, don't worry about Ralph, he'll kill somebody in prison and we'll never see him again, and that's that.
And so ended, after 16 years of waiting and 45 months as boss, the brief and ultimately bitter reign of Ralph Natale as the last true don of the Philadelphia family of La Cosa Nostra.
I put the family back together, he said, and I get arrested. Jesus Christ, what the frig happened? Then all hell breaks loose.
For a second time, Natale found his wife left adrift with no income as he wasted away behind bars. But this time, something inside him had changed. Skinny Joey was no Skinny Razor, and his crew were hardly worth comparing with the mafioso of Natale's youth. There was no Angelo Bruno, no John DiTullio, nor even a Salvi Testa in this motley crew of street thugs.
Those punks. We made a pact in prison. If I get jammed up, you take care of my wife and family, Natale said. And if you get jammed up, your girlfriend, your mother, I'll take care of them. You know my record, not a dime. I went away, not an envelope. I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to see those punks in a courtroom.
When he was locked up yet again, Natale's rage against Merlino and the rest quickly reached a boiling point. The infuriated boss began to question his lifelong devotion to La Cosa Nostra. By now, the organization lived on only in the minds of men such as him. What was happening in the mob on the cusp of the new millennium had as much to do with the mafia as the modern Olympics had to do with amateur athletics. They were two different games entirely.
So my wife and I reach out for Jimmy Mayer, the head of the Philadelphia Squad on Organized Crime.
Natale remembered about a decision that once seemed unthinkable.
He was a young FBI guy when I got arrested in '79. but I didn't hold it against him, because he had to do his job. So now he stops by. He saw me, had a little conversation with me. I said, I'm thinking I might do something. He knew. He said, they didn't do nothing for you, did they, Ralph? I said, that's my business. And eventually I decided I was going to do something against my nature. Those punks. I ain't gonna do no time for those punks. I want to see them in the courtroom.
This was another of Natale's pinpoints in time, when a single choice transforms a man's life. The lifelong gangster turned his back on the life that had meant everything to him since he was a boy, and became a federal witness. Joey Merlino had finally accomplished what the Philadelphia authorities, the FBI, and the U.S. Congress could not. After decades of silence, Ralph Natale was ready to speak inside a courtroom about the inner workings of La Cosa Nostra. Natale was quickly dubbed King Rat. But the old gangster bristles at the suggestion that he was an informant.
I became a government witness. I never wore a wire. I never entrapped anybody. I didn't inform on nobody.
On May 5, 2000, the former Philadelphia family boss arrived at the Camden Federal Courthouse to confess all in his lifetime of crime. His plane from prison was fogged in, and Natale's charcoal suit arrived 2 hours before he did. Then he pleaded guilty to 7 killings, 5 attempted murders, extortion, gambling, and drug dealing. Lucia was waiting for him, along with son Frank. It took just 1 hour to erase 5 decades of mob life, putting Ralph Natale on the side of the federal government. The Philadelphia Daily News noted that Natale, facing life in prison, was expected to do far less time in jail. Natale, before his courthouse reunion with Merlino, would first see the mayor of Camden, Milton Milan. The two had struck up a crooked business relationship, with Milan indicted and Natale called to the witness stand.
Milton Milan would take anything, even a hot stove, Natale recalled of the corrupt politician. He was what the guys in Chicago called double-breasted, meaning he had a wife and kids and a girlfriend mistress and another whole life. Oh my, you're gonna have trouble. We were introduced and we talked and became friends.
Natale offered a deal where both sides would profit from millions of dollars in state and federal funds, earmarked for Camden's redevelopment. The mob boss, after reading about the potential windfall in the newspaper, approached Milan to offer the services of his new construction company, which would use minority-owned businesses as a front. The mobster then sweetened the pot with an immediate cash dividend.
I brought out an envelope with 5 Ben Franklins inside, handed it to him and said, "Have a good time tonight." He said, No, and then right into his pocket.
There was more money to come, as much as $50,000 funneled to the corrupt mayor. Natale recalled paying for Milan and his mistress to take a 1998 vacation in sunny Florida. Natale first took the stand as a federal witness in 2000. Turning his back on the mob to take the witness stand against Milan, he said, was as easy as slipping out of his prison duds into one of the tailored suits he wore to court during 4 days of testimony.
It didn't bother me a bit. The thing I did when I got home to straighten things out, I had to do this, that, the mayor. It didn't bother me. And then it was part of my deal. It didn't bother me. I didn't have anything to prove. What did the mayor end up doing? 3, 4 years?
It turned out to be 5 years of a 7-year jail term. From the witness stand, Natale offered a pithy summation of his relationship with Milan.
I wanted him to rely on me and nobody else. If he had a headache, I would send him an aspirin.
The mayor was convicted on 14 of the 19 federal counts against him. Natale's cooperation helped convict 2 Milan co-conspirators, politician James Mathis and former union boss Daniel Diadone. The latter was Natale's bagman, delivering payoffs to Milan. The main event was next with Skinny Joey and the rest. This time, Natale's testimony reflected both federal agreement and personal animus.
I couldn't wait to see Mr. Merlino again in person.
Natale, impeccably dressed, climbed into the witness stand on March 30th, 2001, the highest-ranking member of the American Mafia ever to testify against his mob compatriots. He wore a dark blue business suit, neatly tailored, along with a white shirt and a blue tie. Merlino fired a death stare at his old boss when Natale swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Skinny Joey was on trial with 6 co-defendants in a massive racketeering case with charges of murder, attempted murder, extortion, gambling, and dealing in stolen property. Star witness Natale was expected to link Merlino to the dead bodies cited in the sprawling indictment. After years of waiting to look Merlino in the face one more time, Natale felt strangely empty as he began a long recitation of his life in crime. He spent 14 days on the witness stand in Philadelphia Federal Court.
I felt nothing. Nothing at all. I'm a cold fish when it comes to that. I'm looking at punks. If it was men and I did something like that, I couldn't do that. They're punks. Look at them. They didn't take care of my wife and family, you pieces of shit. A man's got to take care of that. I don't justify nothing. I know why I did what I did.
Which is not to say Natale was a dispassionate witness. He glared right back at Merlino, their eyes locked in an uncomfortable stare-down that lasted until a federal prosecutor broke the tension. Natale offered a one-fingered salute. "Fuck you, Joey," to his old charges as they shared the courtroom.
I challenged all of them. He must have made a face or something. He's such a punk. And afraid of me. Of course I looked right at him. I called him a punk at every trial I was in. I put my life up for him in that cell at McKean. He didn't bother me. I've been in trouble since the day I came out of my mother's womb.
Natale recounted his long-ago murders of Feeney and McGreal and offered details on other mob rub-outs during his brief and bloody reign. A defense lawyer asked Natale about reports that his family was threatened. The former boss was caught on taped phone calls from prison announcing his imminent return to Philly, a declaration that, though bogus, would deliver a message to his old mob colleagues. Natale offered his own translation years later.
Whatever I do, don't you touch my family, 'cause you won't have no family when I get home, if I do come home.
During his 14 days on the witness stand, he appeared briefly before the very man who wore a wire against him, Previty, a.k.a. the Fat Rat. The two, perhaps fortunately, never crossed paths during their time working for the feds.
I didn't even know he was there,
said Natale of his mob bête noire. Previty testified that Merlino had borrowed money from Natale, gone to Vegas, and blown the whole stake. Natale acknowledges that even while in the embrace of the FBI and federal prosecutors, he was plotting to whack archenemy Merlino.
Positively! What am I going to do? That's me. I'm never going to change until the day I die. He owed me money. They all owed me money. That's the way I lived my life.
The jury returned on July 20th, 2001, and acquitted Merlino and his associates of the murders and attempted murders after a 4-month trial. They were convicted on lesser counts of racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, including gambling and extortion. 11 of the 12 jurors believed the defendants were guilty, but thought the government had failed to prove its case. "There was enough gray area," one juror explained to the Philadelphia Inquirer. "We believed they did it, but we couldn't convict on a belief." Natale, despite his lingering animus toward Merlino and the rest, insists the verdict meant nothing to him.
I'm going to tell you something. I wasn't disappointed. That may sound funny, but it's true. I was obligated to talk. I kept my obligation. I wouldn't want anybody to go to prison. I would have rather done what I had to do on the street. I had no love for them punks, but I know what prison can do to a man. I would have rather taken care of business myself.
A few months after the Merlino acquittal, Natale learned that payback had finally come to Long John Martorano for his alliance with Nicky Scarfo. The old schemer died on February 5, 2002, 3 weeks after 2 shooters unloaded on him while he was behind the wheel of his Lincoln Continental. He had returned to Philly 3 years earlier after doing 17 years for the McCullough murder and a drug rap. Natale was called in 2004 to testify at a second trial for Merlino, this time for the Sodano execution. Although acquitted of the charge in the earlier racketeering case, a federal judge ruled there was no double jeopardy in a second trial with murder as the charge. Natale arrived at the Newark Federal Courthouse feeling this case didn't have a chance after learning that prosecutors would not call Sodano's killer, Felipe Casale, who had joined Natale on the side of the government.
They said he was half crazy, Natale said, but they didn't bring the shooter to court. If I knew he wasn't testifying, I wouldn't have even gone up there. Felipe and I were cellmates in
New Jersey prison,
Fairton. We had a great time. I mean, he was a killer, but what a great guy. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
Natale arrived for his federal witness finale in February 2004, appearing far more subdued than in his first 3 trips to the witness stand. His goatee was considerably grayer, and his pricey suits had been replaced by prison-issued shirt and pants. He told the same basic story as the first time, with the same basic result. Skinny Joey walked. The two frenemies would never see each other again. 27. The Big Payback. Natale's deal with the government did not come with a get-out-of-jail-free card. He remained behind bars while appearing at 4 separate trials in 4 years, knowing all along that his ultimate fate belonged to a federal judge. There was one problem. When Natale arrived in Camden Federal Court for sentencing in January 2005, the cooperating witness found a most uncooperative judge. Natale was facing a possible life sentence in his plea agreement, but expected a much better deal. Recent history was on his side. Gambino family turncoat Sammy the Bull Gravano admitted 19 murders and received just 5 years. Scarfo's traitorous nephew Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti was sentenced to the same amount of time after copping to his own murderous exploits, a trail of 10 bodies. 5 years sounded about right to Ralphie, and he'd already been locked up since 1998.
Time served would let me walk out of court as a free man,
he thought. U.S. District Court Judge Joseph E. Irenas was unimpressed by Natale's turnaround, by the account of FBI agents and federal prosecutors hailing by his efforts, by the presence of Lucia and a dozen of her children and grandchildren sitting in the courtroom. Natale, his voice cracking and tears filling his eyes, stood and made his own plea.
I can't bring anything back. I go to sleep every night with the shame and remorse that I feel, and I wake up with it.
Every word fell on deaf ears. The hearing lasted 4 hours. The optimistic Natale's hopes for a happy ending waned with each tick of the clock. And then Irenas spoke.
The judge said, "This is not going to be another Gravano or Leonetti thing," recalled Ralph. I said, "Oh man, here we go. Unreal. Everybody thought I'd be able to walk out. I had almost 5 years in already. I felt bad for my family, but it took so long I knew I was in trouble. But that was then, this is now, and that's what counts."
Irenas banged Natale with 13 years in prison on his guilty pleas to drug dealing, racketeering, and corruption charges.
The judge sentenced me not for what I pleaded to, but for what he was told I did, Natale said. He thought I was Genghis Khan. He gave me as much time as the guys I testified against. He wanted me to die in prison. He wanted to hurt me.
Despite the harsh sentence, Natale could see a day when all this was behind him, when he would return home to Lucia and the kids and the grandkids.
I had complete faith that I was going to live until I want to die, he said with a chuckle. If I spent my time thinking about when I was going to die, I wouldn't be Ralph Natale.
If he was lucky, Ralph faced another 6 years in federal lockup. He headed back to prison in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. Upon arrival, he was greeted by Anthony "Tony the Barber" Angelo, a one-time hitman for the Chicago mob. The ex-Marine and Purple Heart recipient from the Korean War was doing life, leaving Natale to reflect on the circumstances that had brought them together in this place.
You say, why do guys become what we are?
He mused.
Every different reason, this way, that way.
Angelo, his nickname came from his day job as a haircutter, served as Ralph's hype man, spreading the gospel of Natale.
When I went there, all the guys who didn't know me had heard of me. Some of the black guys, the Latinos, they said he was the boss, wasn't he? Natale said. You know what Tony said? He wasn't a boss. He was a don. He was the last of the dons. There's nobody else. He worked his way up. He wasn't handed it.
His Allenwood arrival caused a stir among the prison's mobbed-up population. Natale was greeted with sweatsuits and his beloved cigars.
It's a tradition,
he explained. Natale made another new friend in Allenwood, an Irish priest from New York who made the trip to Pennsylvania, where he tended an imprisoned flock of about 70 Catholics. He worked on Wall Street before answering his calling as a man of the cloth. The unlikely pals quickly hit it off, sharing cigars after Mass and griping about the lack of good Italian food.
He was a real man, this guy. Smoked, laughed, cursed once in a while, said Natale. He would come up, he'd serve communion, and he'd hear confession. And I hadn't gone to confession for 45 years, before somebody's wedding. It wasn't mine. I asked him, Father McDevitt, could you do me a favor after Mass one Sunday? He said, yeah, what is it, Ralphie? Of course. I said, would you hear my confession next week? He said it would be an honor, and he did. He heard my confession. I was the last one in that day.
The mob killer and the man of God sat face to face inside a federal prison as Natale recounted his sins, his darkest secrets from a life of murder and mob mayhem.
After we finished, we went out for a smoke. I had my cigar, and he told me, "You know, this made me feel glad that I'm a priest because you chose me to hear your confession." And I told him, "Because you're a man, and a man of the cloth. I know you believe in what you're talking about. A lot of them don't." We shook hands and hugged one another. It was like nothing because I trusted him. No bullshit, no nothing. It felt good telling him. He was such a good guy. I know that's what a priest should be like.
Getting old in federal lockup came with its own set of woes. Natale remembers a killer toothache that left him in agony for 3 weeks with no way of seeing a dentist.
To get a dentist in Allenwood, you had to be the president. Finally, I said, hell with this. I got the dental floss and turned my back from the cell window. I thought, I gotta pull this now. I worked the dental floss down, cut into the gum, and pop! It popped right out. All the blood came out. Tony the barber stole a bottle of peroxide for me, and I washed my mouth out.
Natale's smile on the day of his release was hardly as bright as the one he'd brought into Allenwood. The feds offered to put him in the Witness Protection Program, but he quickly refused after leaving prison for the last time on May 19th, 2011.
I never went to no program, he said with pride. They said, we'll put you in the best place. What? Come on. My family, my children, my grandchildren. I can't see them? No way. I didn't become a witness to live in some closet in Omaha, Nebraska.
Natale proved right about one thing. He wound up doing more time than his nemesis Merlino. Skinny Joey walked out of a Florida prison 2 months before Natale's release. Once released, Natale made it clear to one and all that he was done as a witness. He'd gone toe-to-toe with Merlino and the rest. Natale was done working for the government.
Even now, to this day, they want this or that. And I told them when I got done, I will never be a witness against anybody for the rest of my life, and you remember that. I told all the agents and the U.S. Attorney. 2 years ago, they took a ride to see me when I was living in Baltimore. 2 FBI agents. They asked about a name. I said, nah, I don't know. Remember what I told you when I came home? I'll never be a witness again.
When Natale exited prison for the last time, his loyal wife, Lucia, and their 3 daughters were waiting outside.
And then, he said simply, I came home.
Epilogue. Last words. The Don, in his dotage, steers well clear of the streets of Philadelphia and his checkered past. When he talks about the family, he's referring to the ever-expanding Natale clan. He's now the patriarch of a large, sprawling, and successful clan that stretches across 4 generations. Natale speaks fondly of his wife and proudly of their 5 kids, their grandkids, and the great-grandkids. The streets of Philadelphia are a thing of the past, replaced by wandering deer and wild turkeys. Many nights, Natale sleeps on the couch. It's the one place in his new home that feels like a prison bed, and it helps him to drift off. The only gun he wields is a water pistol to chase the cat off the living room furniture. Natale is just as surprised as anyone, and more than most, that he's still alive and well.
I mean, they were betting I wouldn't make 25 years old when I was on the street, he says, enjoying the life of a contented man. He'll never make it. Now they're dead and I'm here. It's tough, he laughs.
Natale mourns the loss of the old mafia, the world where he grew up. The whole thing was killed by men who were never satisfied with their position or their riches, men without respect for the life or their own lives.
Greed destroyed everything, he declares. Everything. Ever watch that movie, The Wolf of Wall Street? There's greed in everything. In Wall Street, in politics, in the mob. I can't make head or tails about it. If you're doing okay, why get greedy? Why go overboard? You're making a living, taking care of your wife and family. You've got a few extra dollars to gamble and have a good time with? What do you need more for?
Reflecting on his decades in the mob, Natale recalls his personal highlight.
When Carlo and Ange made me and sent me out with all the power of their 2 families.
The flip side, his lowest moment?
When I was in prison, he replies quickly, and they killed Angelo Bruno.
Natale, like his old pal Blinky Palermo, wants his remains cremated. He's already decided on an epitaph. Here lies a fool.
I mean that, he says seriously. That's what I have to say. Put that on my gravestone. That's what we all are, men like me.
But that's somewhere in the future. Right now, he's too busy to consider that option.
I can't drop dead. I got too much to do in my life.
And while the past may be the past, that's the world where Ralph Natale finds that he still often lives.
My head is like an attic in an old house, he finally says. It's filled with all sorts of things. I think about it constantly, even when I'm asleep. The last dream is that I'm in prison again. Every night.
Postscript. On August 4th, 2016, Manhattan federal prosecutor Preet Bharara unsealed a lengthy mob indictment against members of 4 New York organized crime families, Bonanno, Lucchese, Gambino, and Genovese, and the remnants of the old Philadelphia mob. Among the obscure mafiosi arrested were Goodfellas known on the street as Tony the Wig, Mustache Pat, Tugboat, Stymie, and Harpo. Only one name jumped off the 32 pages detailing the myriad crimes: Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino, busted again on a federal racketeering charge, unable to get out of his own way.
I wasn't that surprised, said Natale about the arrest. I expected it. It's a wonder somebody didn't put 2 bullets into him since he got out.
The now 54-year-old Merlino, as recently as 3 years earlier, had sworn off the mob life.
I want no part of that. Too many rats,
he told veteran Philadelphia mob chronicler George Anastasia. After serving 11 years in prison on his federal raps, Ralph's old nemesis relocated to South Florida and opened a restaurant named Merlino's, where he served as the maitre d'. The place suffered through financial woes, in part because Merlino was jailed for 4 months in 2015 after the Fed spied him inside a Florida cigar bar with fellow Philly expat Johnny Ciancaglini. His latest arrest left its future uncertain. Merlino, it seems, couldn't escape the lure and the allure of the old days, when he served as Natale's underboss as they reclaimed the city after the disastrous reign of Nicky Scarfo. It's the old definition of insanity: doing the exact same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Look, his IQ might be 84, said Natale of Merlino. He's a complete idiot. He put himself in this position. If he goes away this time, it's going to destroy him. When he went away before, he did time as the boss. He was young and thinking about coming home, and people think about you differently.
If convicted this time, Merlino could stay behind bars into his 70s. He was accused as one of the organization's ruling triumvirate, along with a pair of Genovese family capos. The idea of Merlino running the Philadelphia mob from Boca Raton seemed a stretch, like Marlins manager Don Mattingly running the Yankees from Miami. There's even some question as to its current membership and activities, as the indictment listed 6 other Floridians as defendants, but not a single resident of the city of brotherly love. Yet court papers indicated the case against Merlino is extremely strong, consisting in part of numerous explicit recordings in which Merlino discussed the crimes that he was committing and exhibited his role as a leader. Federal investigators say Merlino had failed to listen to his own advice about informants. An undercover FBI agent and a cooperating witness managed to infiltrate the mob consortium dubbed by prosecutors as the East Coast La Cosa Nostra Enterprise, operating from Massachusetts to Florida. The witness, according to prosecutors, worked directly under Merlino at one point during the probe. The details aren't important to Natale. The bottom line for the retired gangster: the mob of his youth is as dead as Angelo Bruno or Salvi Testa.
They are what they are, he said of the 21st century mob. I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I come from a different time and a different place. There are no old-timers, no men running things. The intelligence quotient is way down. Believe me, I'm in a better place.
This concludes Last Dawn Standing by Larry McShane and Dan Pearson. Narrated by Alexander Sendies.